The streets of Berlin felt particularly cold on Halloween night. The dim glow of neon lights reflected off the wet cobblestones, casting fragmented shadows on the sidewalk. I pulled my coat tighter around me and glanced down at the notebook in my hand. A few hastily scribbled words stood out: Black Rose Tavern, mysterious patron, bizarre deaths. This wasn't my first time investigating urban legends, but this one unsettled me more than any before. A man dressed in 19th century attire, appearing without fail every Halloween night, sitting silently in the corner of the tavern on a red leather sofa. He orders a drink called Hellfire but never speaks to anyone. And every single person who has ever met his gaze dies within months under inexplicable circumstances. I pushed open the heavy wooden door. A wave of alcohol and aged wood washed over me. Moving slowly to the bar, I ordered a dark beer, my eyes scanning the room. I was waiting for him. The clock struck midnight, each chime deep and drawn out, as if time itself had slowed. Then, a faint creak of the door hinges, like the sound of an old wooden coffin being pried open. The entire tavern seemed to hold its breath. The murmurs ceased. The clinking of glasses fell silent. Even the dust in the air felt heavier. He had arrived. The man was clad in a meticulously tailored black frock coat, a tall top hat perched atop his head. His skin was so pale it was almost translucent. His face held no expression, frozen, like a ghost suspended in time. Slowly, he moved toward the corner. The deep red leather sofa awaited him, an abyss poised to swallow souls whole. He sat down, lifted his hand, and the bartender immediately placed a glass before him, a glass of Hellfire. The dark crimson liquid shimmered ominously under the dim lights. No one dared to look at him. He was a silent curse, draping the tavern in an invisible shroud of dread. I fought the shiver crawling up my spine, forcing myself not to stare. But curiosity is a poison, gnawing at the mind, impossible to resist. Then, suddenly, he lifted his head, ever so slightly, his gaze sweeping across the room. I held my breath. And then, his eyes stopped on me. A cold fist clenched around my heart. My blood turned to ice. My throat went dry. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. His eyes were black, an abyss with no reflection, no light. Just an infinite void. I couldn't read him, but he was reading me. No smile. No reaction. Just a stare. A long, unbroken stare. Then, at last, he lowered his gaze, his fingers tracing the rim of the glass before taking a slow sip. The air shifted. The tavern stirred, chairs scraped softly, people exhaled, as if waking from a silent nightmare. I turned sharply away, drawing in a deep breath, trying to steady myself. But my heart still pounded violently. My fingers trembled against the wooden bar. I knew then, I was part of this story now. Even after I got home, I could still feel those eyes. Even with my own shut tight, they lingered, etched deep into my mind, like a brand seared into my soul. I flipped open my notebook, trying to piece together the details of tonight, hoping logic could carve a path through the madness. But the more I tried, the more useless it all seemed. Rationality had no place in this nightmare. I threw myself into the investigation, digging through every historical record tied to the Black Rose Tavern. Old newspapers, scattered reports, fragments of a pattern began to emerge. Every year, without fail, after Halloween night, one of the tavern's regulars would die under mysterious circumstances. At first, the deaths seemed almost explainable: drownings, car accidents, sudden cardiac arrests. But then, they grew stranger. One man was found dead in his sleep, suffocated, yet there were no signs of struggle, not even a crease on his bedsheets. Another was discovered curled up in the corner of his apartment, his face frozen in terror, fingers outstretched toward empty space, as if pointing at something no one else could see. And all of them shared the same symptoms before they died: crippling fear, paranoia, hallucinations. Some left behind cryptic writings, scribbled notes, frantic messages scratched onto walls with their own nails. "Don't look at him. He's in the mirror." I hear him whispering. But what truly sent a shiver down my spine, what made the breath hitch in my throat, was what I found in a 1952 archive. An old photograph. It was the Black Rose Tavern, almost identical to how it looked now. Same dim lighting. Same weathered wooden bar. And in the corner, on that deep red leather sofa, sat a man in a 19th century frock coat, a tall hat perched on his head, his face deathly pale. A caption beneath the image read, "Halloween night. The mysterious patron. 1952. If he was already there in 1952, then who, or what, was he? A cold, visceral fear crept through me, coiling around my spine like an icy hand. I realized then, every single person who had ever looked into this, who had ever dared to uncover the truth, had ended up on the list. And now, so had I. There was no turning back. Fear tightened around my throat like an invisible hand, squeezing the breath from my lungs. Since that night, my life had begun to unravel. As soon as the sun dipped below the horizon, a suffocating unease settled into my room. I could feel something lurking in the darkness, watching. The air itself felt thick, heavy, like I was breathing through a dense fog. At first, it was just small things, fleeting shadows flickering in the corner of my vision, whispers bleeding through the walls at night. Then came the nightmares. I dreamed of sitting on the red leather sofa in the Black Rose Tavern. Across from me sat the mysterious patron, motionless. His pale hands rested on the table, long, yellowed nails tapping slowly against the wood. A dull, rhythmic sound. I wanted to move, to run, but something held me in place, like unseen chains coiled around my limbs. Even breathing felt like a struggle. Then, slowly, he reached up and removed his hat. And I saw his face. It was not a human face. It was a grotesque mosaic of countless fragmented visages, stitched together like a nightmare brought to life. His eyes, deep, hollow pits of nothingness, devoured the space between us. There was no light in them, no reflection. Just an endless abyss. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Only the whispers. A chorus of murmurs filled the room, thousands of voices whispering in unison, slithering into my ears, into my mind, into the marrow of my bones. And then, I saw myself. I was seated on the red sofa, wearing a black frock coat, a tall hat perched upon my head, a glass of Hellfire cradled in my fingers. Across from me sat someone new. A fresh patron, wide-eyed, trembling with the same fear that had once gripped me. In the dream, I tried to scream, to move, to do something. But my body only sat there, unmoving. And then, my lips curled into a lifeless smile. I woke up with a jolt, my fingers dug so deep into the sheets that my nails had nearly torn through them. Cold sweat drenched my skin, but the terror didn't fade. Because my room was not as I had left it. The glass of my window held a faint, hazy reflection, a shadowy figure standing behind me. It wasn't mine. I spun around, nothing. The room was empty. But when I looked down, my shadow was gone. It wasn't on the floor where it should have been. It was standing upright, watching me. Its head tilted slightly, as if studying me with quiet curiosity. Its form was blurred, its outline shifting. It was wearing a black coat, a tall hat. And then, as I stared at its face, a crushing wave of despair washed over me. Because its face was mine. I'm falling apart. No matter how I struggle, those eyes never leave me. My shadow is no longer just a simple reflection of light, it has a will of its own. It moves independently now, lingering in corners where it shouldn't be, watching me from angles that defy logic. Scratches have begun appearing on my walls, claw marks, as if carved by nails. And the symbols. They're the same as the ones I saw in the cellar of the Black Rose Tavern. Yes. The cellar. I remember now, the old bartender had mentioned it once, in hushed tones. He called it the place where the real secret was buried. Maybe the answers are there. Maybe there's a way to break this curse. That night, I returned to the tavern with a flashlight in hand. The warm glow of the bar's lights does nothing to chase away the cold that has settled in the air. The scent of dust and decay clings to everything. The bartender sees me. He doesn't say a word. But in his eyes, there's something, pity. No one stops me as I make my way to the old wooden staircase and step down into the darkness. The cellar is damp, filled with rows of aging oak barrels. Faded oil paintings hang on the walls, their images obscured by layers of dust. I sweep my flashlight across the stone floor until I see it. A mirror. Tall, ancient, its frame wrapped in rusted metal, covered in inscriptions worn down by time. Through the dust and cracks, I can barely make out the words etched along its edges. Stare into it, and you stare into the abyss. My pulse pounds in my ears. I catch my own reflection in the glass, and immediately, I know something is wrong. My reflection is smiling. I am not. Slowly, it lifts a hand, but I have not moved. It is not me. I step back, the beam of my flashlight trembling. But it stays where it is, watching me, its grin stretching wider. Then, it removes its hat. And I finally understand. No one who locks eyes with the mysterious patron simply dies. They are replaced. Trapped in the mirror. Becoming the next inheritor of the curse. Because this isn't about a ghost. This isn't about a spirit haunting the tavern. It is a cycle. A loop with no end. A contract that can never be broken. The reflection extends a hand toward me. The surface of the mirror begins to ripple, an open doorway waiting to swallow me whole. I turn to run, but my legs feel like they're sinking into wet cement. I can feel my body hollowing out, my consciousness being pulled toward the other side. The clock strikes midnight. The world dissolves into black. And when I open my eyes again, I am sitting on the red leather sofa. The tavern is just as it was. The lights glow softly. The air hums with quiet conversation. A new patron enters. Their gaze meets mine. I try to scream, to warn them, to tell them to look away, but my lips do not move. The bartender approaches, smiling warmly. The usual, "Sir? Hellfire?" I nod. And in a voice that is not mine, a voice that is cold and hollow, I hear myself say, "Yes." Just like every year.